So this is a talk which I gave a few days ago in a seminar series in Aberystwyth. I did it by video link, and now I'm going to redo it again in pieces and with some small changes. And so here goes. Right. So the title is Miscarriages of Justice in a Healthcare Setting. And that's the topic I was asked to talk about. And I'm going to focus, for the purposes of this talk, on nurses, and in particular on the case of Lucy Letby. And I'm also going to concentrate on the statistical issues in that case. And you see up there the person, and you see the spike in deaths, and you see the association, the presence, the common denominator of all the suspicious events was Lucy Letby. On the left you see the spike of early neonatal deaths. Right, so, I have to move over here. Yes. So, some things to bear in mind about hospitals is that they are very dangerous places. There are people die in hospital. In some medical units, deaths are normal, almost routine, and certainly frequent. Everywhere, medical errors are common. People are working hard. People don't know. Individual carers don't have incomplete knowledge, and as they care for the patient, they learn more, of course, but there can be misdiagnosis, there can be accidental wrong medication given, all kinds of medical errors can happen, and unfortunately they tend not to be admitted when they do happen, or if they aren't noticed, they are allocated to somebody who's at the bottom of the pile with regards to status. And you can think of nurses are frequently scapegoats for errors actually made by the doctors in charge. There are also things going on which people may not want to talk about. What's the difference between assisted dying, which is illegal in general, and palliative care, which is legal? When you're terminally ill in hospital, you will be pleased to get palliative care. Triage is common and necessary because resources are limited, and so possibly patients who have more chance of getting better will not get better care, but will get more care, will get more expensive care, will get more intensive care in various respects than patients who are clearly not going to live. Well, in a hospital, it is possible to find deadly substances, and of course, because people are dying anyway, it could be possible to kill patients it could be possible, and some people say easy, to murder patients, because you can find the means, you will have the opportunity, especially because the opportunity to not be noticed, it is said, because people are dying anyway. So if you are making people die a little bit sooner or a little more often, you won't be noticed. You need not be noticed. Anyway, social structure in the hospital is extremely hierarchical. There are godlike consultants at the top, and of course there are managers a little bit further away, general hospital managers. There are hierarchies. Actually, there can be clashes between people in the hierarchy, which leads to problems. Clashes between people at the different top parts of the hierarchy. Things keep changing, and not everyone knows everything, so policy makers and managers who make policy decisions and also consultants who at the top of the pyramid are making decisions may be changing. Policies may be changing, and not everybody needs to be informed. In the case of Lucy Letby, who worked in a children's hospital, a specialist children's hospital, policy had been changed such that children and babies who were really severely ill would be transferred faster from intensive care to medium intensive care, in the hope that they would then go home sooner, be able to go home sooner, and with the result that the deaths, many of which were inevitable, would occur at home, not in the hospital. Well, as a result of the change in policy, the deaths popped up in the wrong place, namely in medium intensive care. That had not been the intention, but that happened. And it led to a spike in deaths in the unit where Lucy Letby was working. And nobody knew what the cause of the spike was. The next thing, of course, is that human beings see patterns everywhere. We do see clusters of events. Clusters are common, whether they're meaningful or not. We see them and we give them meaning. We also see correlation, and we instinctively believe that in causation. Striking correlations have causes, and if there's not an obvious kind of, say, mechanical cause, then we tend to believe in an agent being the cause. We believe in malevolent agents or benevolent agents, but we basically believe that when a lot of bad things happening, a single agent, typically a person, is causing them, and that's what we look for. And that's what evolution has evolved our minds, so that's how they work. So those are background characteristics. Now I'll now give a list of characteristics of unsafe convictions of nurses for killing or harming patients in those circumstances, which can be which more easily arise because of the features which I just listed. The background characteristics lead to, I think, rather striking and always there features of unsafe convictions. First of all, there has to be a spike in unexplained or unexpected serious adverse events, or a cluster of similar and unusual events. In the case of Ben Geen, who worked in the accident and emergency department of the hospital, so that basically caring for patients brought in often by ambulance and preparing them for admission into the hospital, properly into some section of the hospital, for instance, intensive care, maybe classifying them as patients for cardiology or for some other department. And it is quite normal that patients coming into accident and emergency actually suffer cardiac arrests in that section of the hospital, and it's but it's rather less common that they suffer what is called respiratory arrests, which means they collapse, and the cause is they have stopped breathing, but they didn't stop breathing because their heart stopped working, or they stopped breathing for other reasons. Respiratory arrests are 4 times less common than cardiac arrests. They're not uncommon, but they are a more unusual kind of collapse in the emergency section of the hospital. And suddenly they seem to be happening all the time. Interestingly, as was later discovered, at the same time, cardiac arrests seem to be happening much less often than normal. So part of this spike in a certain normally rare serious adverse event was simply, probably in my opinion, an example of the so-called Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, which is something unusual happens on one day, and it's unusual and striking, and then you see it happening again the next day in different circumstances, but it comes up again and then again. Of course, if you suddenly see a rare bird and then you see another rare bird, the same rare bird, same kind of rare bird, it could be that the whole flock of those rare birds has arrived. So a spike in unusual events in itself doesn't have to mean anything, but in hospital it will certainly be given a meaning. And in the Benguin case, the spike in respiratory arrests was connected to the fact that later an incident happened involving muscle relaxant used to temporarily stop breathing of patients coming into accident and emergency, which has to be given if you're going to stick tubes down their throat and so on. Right, a spike, that's not enough. You're going to need correlation with a particular nurse. The unexplained and unexpected events need to be associated with a particular nurse, and it will often be a nurse who stands out in the crowd, and of course a nurse who is often there, who does a lot of overtime and is energetic and diligent, is going to stand out more than a nurse who treats her job as his job as a 9-to-5 matter and does not go out of their way to work extra hard. Unfortunately, the nurses who work extra hard are seen as threatening to the nurses who don't want to work extra hard. It shows them up. Yeah. Well, the spike and the correlation is not enough, but it's enough to get things rolling. What we need to actually get a conviction is going to be some kind of strong evidence that one patient might have been harmed. And in the Lucy Letby case, we have the insulin. We have the insulin readings of the immunoassay tests, which do suggest insulin poisoning by insulin which should not have been there, but have other explanations as well. And moreover, the immunoassay test does not say who gave the extra insulin, if indeed there's insulin there which has been forgetting the word, sorry, insulin has been given to the patient which shouldn't have been done. Right. In the Lucy Letby case, there's digoxin poisoning. There is one piece of forensic evidence which does suggest a patient has been deliberately harmed. It's forensic evidence, which means it needs to be interpreted. It needs to be interpreted scientifically. It does not immediately say who put that substance in the body if it is there, and it can be explained in. There are alternative scientific explanations, but they may not be brought up at trial, of course. There ought to be, if that is not there, then there should be some circumstantial evidence which seems extremely incriminating, some very circumstantial evidence. So, for instance, the green post-it note in the Lucy Letby case has got an innocent explanation. The syringe in the pocket in the Benguin case has got an innocent explanation. The strange things which Lucy Letby wrote in her diary she does have an innocent explanation, and these innocent explanations are told to the jurors. Almost always they do have a defense, and the defense will attempt to explain the evidence which seems incriminating, and they will possibly be able to do a good job at that. But still, its emotional impact on jurors and on onlookers, on court journalists, on the media, there needs to be something which has a powerful impact on laypersons, in particular a jury. Of course, we don't know what actually influences a jury, but we can guess that it's the same things that influence court journalists and social media warriors, true crime enthusiasts. As well as such a striking piece of circumstantial evidence, there needs to be a whole lot more circumstantial evidence if indeed the person is innocent, and in which case there will not be really strong forensic evidence or circumstantial evidence. I'm talking about unsafe convictions, which by definition mean that the person did not commit the crime of which they did get convicted. The trial will be dedicated to going through a mountain of circumstantial evidence, as in the Lucy Letby case, the handover notes and the Facebook searches and so on and so forth, which if you look at them dispassionately, they are completely neutral. They could even be seen as evidence for innocence. They when you look at all the evidence together and you put yourself into the defense's shoes, then all that circumstantial evidence will fit to your defense story. Your defense story should be good if indeed the defendant is innocent and there is no serious proof that nurse harmed anybody. Remember, these cases are such that the universal characteristic of the unsafe convictions of killer nurses is that nobody ever saw anything being done by that nurse to harm a patient. No direct proof of deliberate harm to any patient whatsoever. There really is only circumstantial evidence. The spike and the correlation are circumstantial. The digoxin poisoning in the Lucy Letby case, or the immunoassay poisoning in the Lucy Letby case are circumstantial. the green post-it note is circumstantial, and so on and so forth. Now, of course, you can convict a person of murder with only circumstantial evidence. I'm not saying that that's not possible. I'm saying that in a feature of unsafe convictions is that only circumstantial evidence is used. And if one looks at the prosecution arguments and if one looks at the defense response to those arguments, one can say that the circumstantial evidence was not enough, should not have been enough. In the Lucy Letby case and in the Lucy Letby case, the circumstantial evidence enabled the nurses to be convicted, and one can understand how that happened, I would say. And in the Lucy Letby case, a new expert opinion was needed but not new evidence, but new expert opinion was needed for her exoneration. And so at some point it was experts against experts. And one will always be able to say, yes, but so Lucia was first rightly convicted and then she was not rightly exonerated because the defense went expert shopping. Well, that's what the true crime enthusiasts could say, will try to say, do say in the Lucy Letby case, of course. I'm getting close to talking about statistics in these cases. In the Lucy Letby case in particular, let me mention a kind of again, but certainly emphasize what is the problematic nature of such cases is that of alleged harm done by a nurse in a hospital, in a hospital unit where deaths do happen. A priori, it's not clear that there is a murder to investigate. The police have got to decide whether or not there was a crime, not just who was the perpetrator of the crime. The problem with the investigations is that they often start with hospital employees coming to the police with a suspicion of a crime and with a suspect, but with no proof of a crime. And this puts the police in a really impossible position. It shouldn't be impossible because they ought to do what the generally agreed protocols agree, which is that the first thing that should happen is that a multidisciplinary team of independent medical experts needs to be brought in to find out if there is indeed any proof of illegal activity. Is there evidence that malicious harm has been done to patients? Then you can start asking the question, who did it? You could say in the Lucy Letby case that actually before it went to the police, the right thing happened. It went to the RSPCH. And let me say straight away, I'm afraid I think the RCPCH did not do all that they, I don't know if they could have done it, but all that they should have insisted was done, because their investigating team of external experts consisted, as far as I know, solely of pediatricians and neonatologists. It did not include a statistician or an epidemiologist. It did not include obstetricians. It was not sufficiently multidisciplinary, and in particular because it consisted of clinicians it took the point of view that it just needed to look at each medical case independently and decided in each case separately, seems to be a natural event, and it couldn't make up its mind in a few of these cases, which actually is normal, by the way. Deaths on a neonatal unit often are never explained. But in particular, the RCPCH never investigated what the cause was of the spike. They did not ask themselves that question, which is a question for a joint investigation by a statistical expert or epidemiologist together with medical and nursing experts, and that didn't happen. So the spike was never investigated. And that's why all the way through, still the existence of the spike is said to be indisputable. We'll come to that. I will come back to that. So there's a problem for the police, that they are instantly in a dangerous territory where they're basically out of their comfort zone, and they're going to need to work with experts. And unfortunately, in the Lucy Letby case, they chose to work with the consultants at the hospital in question and with a very dodgy external expert who actually told the police that they did not need to bring in other experts. There was no need to bring in experts from other disciplines. He could do it on his own. Very, very, very suspect. So the police are going to have a problem. Police don't understand probability and statistics, nor do lawyers and judges. The jury doesn't understand medical science. Their job really is to decide on whether experts and whether experts are trustworthy or not on the basis of their gut feelings about the character of these persons, their common sense, impression of the reliability of medical experts, for instance. They should decide on innocence or guilt of the victim, the victim of the miscarriage of justice, of the accused, on the basis of their gut feelings about could that person be a killer or not. That's their job, that's their task and the prosecution knows this. That's why the prosecution hammers all the way through the trial on the little details of Lucy Letby's demeanour and behaviour on trial. I mean, in the box on the stand, and her behaviour at her work. Tiny little things which can be given a sinister interpretation or make her appear to be a suspicious, cold, and evil, unfeeling person. That's how the prosecution wants the jury to get that into their heads, and hammers away on it for, 10 months, using circumstantial evidence again and again, interpreted again and again from the point of view of guilt, which is their job, which is the prosecution's job. Of course, it's the job of the prosecution to do that. So we have, before we get into the statistics, in the second part, we are going to have the following items. I think a dysfunctional hospital unit. It's a hospital unit where surprising things happen and where people get very worried about bad things happening is typically also dysfunctional in one way or another. And it helps to have a doctor who gets paranoid about the things which are happening which they don't understand and which they're worried about. And of course, a doctor who may subconsciously realize that bad things might be happening because of inadequacies of their care. They might subconsciously realize that, but they will welcome the idea that somebody else is the cause of the bad things which seem to keep happening. You need a nurse who stands out from the crowd, typically one who does lots and lots of shifts and who works hard and enthusiastically and carefully. Nobody ever saw the nurse do anything wrong, but they are always present when things went wrong. There will be a mountain of circumstantial evidence. There will be some suggestive but not conclusive forensic evidence. There will be a lot of pseudoscientific psychology based on interpretations of trivia. There will be amateur statistics. There will be statistical data interpreted by amateurs. Whether they'll actually use probability or statistics to do so up front, it doesn't really matter. The prosecution will actually do their best to make the statistical conclusions obvious. You do not need a statistician to see that this can't be a coincidence. Okay, so I'm going to stop there, and I will take it up again with the roster chart and the spike, and with more remarks about statistics. So now we're going to stop the recording.